I'm so happy to be doing this, and I'm glad that you've chosen to join me. Over the past weeks, I've been trying to sketch broadly and generally the arc of history of Israel with this mysterious God who called Israel and made a covenant with Israel. A literature came into being, which we've referenced. Different books were written, eventually including books from figures called prophets, mouthpieces of the mysterious Lord, the mysterious God of Exodus and covenant. Over time, Israel's monarchy, which reached its height really during the reigns of David and Solomon, the monarchy began to deteriorate. And after the death of Solomon, Israel divided into two kingdoms with two separate kings, two separate monarchies. The northern of those two kingdoms was still called Israel. The southern of the two kingdoms and smaller of the two kingdoms was called Judah, and its capital was Jerusalem. In Judah, the monarchy remained fairly stable, and there continued to be someone from the dynastic family of David on the throne. But the northern kingdom was very unstable. There were assassinations, new families came to power, and frequently it was the Lord's prophets who were involved in destabilizing the government. Biblical faith has a long reputation not for supporting the status quo, but for raising critical questions and, in a way, destabilizing the status quo. In any case, the traditions of ancient Israel, the practices connected with Israel's faith in this covenant Exodus God, were reinterpreted by the prophets, reinterpreted by temple figures. But there was, across the whole arc of this history, disagreement and conflict. Often that disagreement is directly about what the Lord requires and what the Lord calls people to. It sometimes comes to a head in moments as when the prophet Jeremiah goes up to the temple and proclaims judgment and disaster if Judah continues on the course that they are following. And another person who calls himself a prophet stands up and tells Jeremiah that he's completely wrong, and even breaks off of Jeremiah the yoke that he was symbolically wearing. And Jeremiah then pronounces a kind of curse against this prophet and says he's a false prophet. So sometimes these conflicts bring about a direct kind of confrontation, but conflict and argument continues eventually in the year 722 before the Common Era, BCE. In the year 722 BCE, after years of pressure from the Assyrian Empire, the Assyrians invaded the northern kingdom, Israel. They assaulted the capital, Samaria. They destroyed the place and took all of the leading citizens of the land away and sent them into exile. And the Assyrians, and it was their usual practice, they dispersed the people of Israel, the northern kingdom, all but the poorest of the poor. They dispersed them throughout the Assyrian Empire. And the result was that all of those Israelites of the northern kingdom all of those descendants of Israel intermarried with local populations and forgot about their Israelite identities. In a certain sense, 10 tribes of the original 12 more or less disappeared, just merged with the population of the Assyrian Empire. And that's why you'll hear talk sometimes about the so-called lost tribes of Israel. That's what they're talking about, these tribes.